Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. Hello, my beautiful listeners. Today I am trying something new. It's not really new, but I'm taking something that I normally write about and turning it into a podcast episode. So today is going to be focused on both the year in review retrospective. This is more of an audio version of the Reimagine Wealth 2025 retrospective that I shared about. And I used to do these seasonally. Every season I would share Reimagine Wealth numbers, what was working, what's not. I am now rolling it back and just planning to do this annually as my capacity has ebbed and flowed, and you'll hear more about that. But you'll be hearing about the 2025 Reimagine Wealth numbers, what that's looking like, and what I'm thinking about for the rest of the year. And I've already made some very intentional decisions based on all of this that you'll hear more about too. So if you're someone who loves taking a peek behind the scenes of self-employment, how I'm choosing to run my business, this is something that folks like Nick Antoinette, Amelia Ruby, and other business owners have done, and that was really motivating to me to also see what's possible. So think of this as a peek behind the curtain. And one disclaimer I always share is Reimagine Wealth is not my full-time job. I do this part-time in addition to being a financial advisor at Oberon Capital Advisors, where I work 32 hours a week. I make $35 an hour there, and that is where I make a majority of my income. So that work combined with what I do at Reimagine Wealth is what supports my overall livelihood, in addition to the income that my partner brings in. And yeah, just in full transparency, my partner earns significantly more than me income-wise, and we share our expenses equitably. That is a big foundational element that allows me to pursue the work that I'm currently doing, the work that I find meaningful, the work that feels like mine to do, without having to make as many sacrifices as I would otherwise. Because my income alone, it would be very difficult for me to afford to live in a single family home in Austin on my own. So something I'm really grateful to him for. Our relationship is really beautiful in a lot of ways. And so, Derek, if you're listening to this, I love you. I appreciate you. And for listeners, just wanted to share that because that's part of my own class privilege, the shared privilege that my partner and I have together. Additionally, when I have excess and when Derek and I have excess, we redistribute that. So currently I'm redistributing. My goal is always to redistribute at least 10% of my gross income. Right now, I'm stretching myself to do somewhere between 10 and 15% of my gross income. So that, of course, is before anything is taken out, like taxes, any benefits, those types of things. So that's what I redistribute individually on a regular basis. And Derek and I also have a shared redistribution goal in addition to that. If you're curious about how that works, what does it mean to share expenses equitably, I share a little bit about that in the first season where I share my own money story. So check that out. I'll link to it in the show notes. And it might go without saying, but of course, if for whatever reason my job situation evolved or my partner's job situation evolved, whether in a positive or negative direction, then how I approach work at Reimagine Wealth would change alongside it. Last thing, then I'll promise that I'll get into the actual numbers that I've been talking about. But the other thing just to call out is when we share our numbers, it's very easy to compare. Some of us might hear these numbers or even hear what I just spoke about and think like, wow, that's really not a lot of money. Others might hear that and think, wow, that's a lot of money. That's way more than I have access to. Both can be true. It's both a lot to some and not a lot to others. And so everything I share is based on where I'm at, my beliefs, my values, my lifestyle, what I choose to spend money on for myself, and what feels worth investing in terms of resisting the bad, building the new, investing in collective liberation. And so I just want to invite you to not use this as a time to judge yourself. But if you are feeling a little agitated by whatever these numbers bring up, maybe tune into that, reflect on that, process with someone in your life. So with that disclaimer aside, here are Reimagine Wealth's 2025 annual numbers. Starting with gross revenue. And for folks who maybe are not as familiar with finance or accounting terminology, gross revenue is essentially the sum of all the money generated by a business or just any type of activity. And it does not take into account anything that has been used to go towards expenses, taxes, compensation. So imagine it as like a bucket of money based on all of the services or the products or whatever the entity is selling. That is gross revenue before anything is distributed from that gross revenue. So Reimagine Wealth's gross revenue came to $18,441 for 2025. This, of course, does not include any work trades that I did or pro bono work. This is the pure financial dollars coming in. Of that gross revenue, I use this kind of system called Profit First, which really helped me think about how I divvy up my expenses as a business owner. And so for me, I set aside different amounts. I have different quote unquote reserves for different types of expenses. So imagine that one bucket of money, and now we're turning it into 4 different buckets of money. So of that bucket of my gross revenue, 25% of that I set aside and move that into a separate bucket or a separate account to go towards quarterly tax payments. 25% is what I decided to land on. Some people choose to do more, some people choose less. That is a business decision that you get to make. I choose 25%. I set aside 10% of my gross revenue to cover future operating expenses. I try to plan these out as much as possible, and there's always unplanned ones as well. So I set aside 10%. Sometimes I need to allocate more towards that. And in those instances, I just pull money from a different, bucket, so to speak. The third bucket is what I compensate myself. It's called an owner's draw. When I take this, an owner's distribution. So 65% I set aside to go towards my own compensation. So if you're a monthly subscriber, for example, the $6 a month, after the payment processing fee, for example, 65% of that goes towards my own compensation, 10% towards operating expenses, and then 25% towards future quarterly tax payments. You might notice if you add that all up, that's 100. I mentioned there was 4 buckets. That's still true. I have an aspirational goal to pay myself a small bonus at the end of every season from a profit reserve. I really haven't implemented that because I've been needing to reallocate to cover operational expenses, as those have been a little bit less predictable. There's been times when I've chosen to travel. There's been times where I've taken a course or purchased things to go towards my own professional development. So aspirationally, I would love to set aside anywhere from like 1 to 5% and pay that towards myself as a small bonus, but I'm not really doing that yet. So I do this so that I could better predict what income I would pay myself on an ongoing time basis. Business income is not so predictable that it's always the same every month. So of that $18,400-ish that I mentioned earlier, 65% of that is what I paid myself. So that means I paid myself $11,987 for 2025. If that were to happen on a monthly basis, if we divide that by 12, that comes to $999 a month. Again, I'll link to my money story episodes where I talk about my enough number. My enough number is $3,000 a month. And most of that is covered through my work at Oberon Capital Advisors. But if I was relying on Reimagine Wealth alone, obviously I would need to make some changes. At the same time, I would also have more capacity to go towards working at Reimagine Wealth. I'd be able to take on more clients, be able to produce more content, be able to market, and do more outreach, do more business development. So I go into all of this just to kind of share the nuances that exist here, the things I'm thinking about, and the balancing act of multiple income streams from multiple places. So that is what the numbers looked like for 2025. And a lot of how I have structured Reimagine Wealth in the past is doing the work that feels most aligned with my energetic capacity. So I think there's a lot of things that worked really well in 2025. Like one of the big things that really stands out to me is the fact that I'm even able to do the work that really fulfills me, that fills my cup, that gives me a sense of purpose and meaning. This is work that I get to do. This is work that felt like a dream. And the fact that a few years later, I'm actually doing it is such a gift. And like, wow, I am just so immensely grateful for that. And I'm also grateful to my partner for supporting both of us so that I can continue to do this in a way that feels aligned. I'm also really happy with the amount of experimentation that I was able to do in 2025. I created so many new things. This podcast, it rolled out at the beginning of 2025. I had been wanting to host a podcast, create a podcast for a long time. I also was able to create the How Much Is Enough cohort and turn that into a self-paced course. Of course, if that's something that you want to participate in, it's a great way to also get clear for yourself on your own enoughness range, especially as you're noticing any feelings coming up as I talk through the numbers. I'll link to that as well in the show notes. And I've made so many aesthetic and operational improvements. I now have a whole portal that I use for clients to work with me. I'm so grateful to my dear friend, an incredible designer, facilitator, executive director of an amazing nonprofit called Gender Unbound, but Jaylyn, who helped redesign my whole website. That is such a win. And it's really helped me get clear on the different types of efforts that intersect between joy and purpose and also what feels sustainable. So I'm really proud of everything that I've done in 2025. And I'm also proud of the delegation that I've had to lean into as I've held feelings of burnout, as I've worked past exhaustion. I've just noticed that I alone cannot hold all of these things. I at least can't hold them well. And I can't show up as the person that I want to be for myself, for the people that I love, for the other commitments that I have if I don't ask for and receive help when it's offered. So I want to give a big shout out to Jaylyn, who I mentioned earlier, Natalie Houchins, who also comes onto the Substack as a guest writer, and Claire Timbo, who really supported standing up the How Much Is Enough cohort launch and was an incredible partner along the way. In terms of what didn't work in 2025, and as I think about the rest of the year, I have been noticing that I've been needing to make a shift in my own energetic capacity. When I originally started doing this work, I wanted to go into this as a way to support myself, do the work that felt meaningful to me, a privilege that I'm able to choose to do that. I acknowledge that's a big privilege, and one that I feel grateful for and want to keep doing. It's also to show up for my beloveds, be able to hold more of the reproductive household labor. If we think about the economy as caring for the home, there's obviously our home, the earth, our society. But then at the microcosm level, like my actual household, I historically have not been the best partner about sharing the reproductive labor equitably. So I wanted to be able to take more of that on, as well as showing up for my community, being able to organize, being able to plant seeds towards a better future, all of those things. And I noticed in 2025 that I felt like I was really overextended, really overcommitted, trying to create so much content, trying to do so many new things, balancing multiple workloads, and my energetic capacity just hadn't felt as reciprocal as I had hoped for. If you had been reading the seasonal reviews, you might not be surprised to hear this, but I really struggle with my own identity being enmeshed in my own work. And I noticed that my identity, how I viewed myself, was getting way too connected to what I was creating. And I felt this need to have firmer boundaries. I needed to have more distance between myself and my work. My work is not me. I am not my work. They are interconnected, but the level of entanglement was just not working well for me. Alongside that contributed to overworking, trying to balance another full-time job, trying to show up in my community, be an organizer. If you have done community organizing, you already know that it can sometimes feel like a whole nother job. And then it's really easy to overcommit, or it's really easy to undercommit. And so I already have struggled with things like codependency, with perfectionism. I have a huge fear of disappointing people. And that fear of disappointing others really motivates and incentivizes me to push myself beyond what I can actually sustain. And so I was noticing that the way that I was working, the energetic capacity that I had for this work, I felt like I was doing so much more, and it was just no longer feeling reciprocal. And it was starting to feel like it was competing with the ability for me to show up for myself, for the ability to show up for my partner, for the ability to contribute to my household. And my intention was that it was always additive. And so that was a big red flag, an indicator for me that something needs to change. And I believe that I will find that place again, because it was, this business hasn't been around for that long. I know that I will find that place again where Reimagine Wealth, all of the work going into this beautiful business, continues to feel additive and reciprocal. So it's just about finding that balance again. And that has led me to be more intentional with my own time and energy this year and going into the future seasons. It means that I'm going to be much more intentional about the volume of clients that I work with at a time. If you ever were looking to do coaching work together, I now will have a select number of clients that I work with. And once I hit that number, I will then have a rolling wait list. Coaching work does not go on indefinitely. Things start, things end. And so I have a rolling wait list. I notify people if I'm at capacity. But I'm going to be more intentional on the volume of coaching clients that I take on, as well as the type of clients that I take on. I primarily work with clients who already have access to wealth, class privilege, and who really want to be committed to wealth redistribution, who want to organize their family or the people around them, with folks who want to leverage their resources, their money, their power, their social capital, to show up in accountability and alignment with grassroots social movements and ultimately be a part of building collective safety nets, as well as finding their own collective stake and transforming themselves in the process. And that can look like a lot of different things. I have worked with people who primarily need support with budgeting, who need support with managing or navigating debt. And that's, of course, something that I do. But there's also so many great coaches out there that can help you with budgeting, can help you with debt management. And so I'm being more selective about the types of clients that I take on. And of course, I still want to work with people across class. So if you are thinking like, oh, but I want to work with you, but now am I that right person? Don't worry about that. I have a free discovery call that I offer. So I have those to make sure that it does feel like a fit for both of us. So if you're wanting to work together, just book a free discovery call and let's talk about it. But that being said, I am being much more intentional about who I work with and how. I'm also slowing down the pace that I create content. I really pushed myself to have this like publishing cadence because that's like the best practice in content creation land. And who the hell even made that up? I mean, probably the people behind the attention economy. But with that being said, I am continuing to produce this podcast. I'm continuing to write for the Substack. And I'm going to keep doing that, but it's going to be at a more sustainable pace. There's going to be seasonal pauses. There's going to be less frequent content. And when I want to create things, when I have the energy for it, I'm going to. The other weekend, I just felt like writing, and so I wrote 2 different essays. And I love that, but I don't want the publishing schedule to determine the pace at which I need to create content. So that's one change that I'm going to be making. I also do not plan to host any live cohorts. I don't have plans to create any new offerings beyond what already exist. So the self-paced How Much Is Enough course exists, but I'm not going to be creating new offerings this year because I just don't have the capacity to put towards that right now. I am also going to be creating more space between when someone pitches an idea or has an ask for me. And this is mostly in relation to different organizing commitments that I have. I'm someone who wears many hats. I'm someone who has connections with many different organizations, different groups. And I sometimes get really burnt out by how many asks there are, how many calls to actions. So I am scaling down the number of mobilizing, organizing, and caretaking commitments that I take on, and being much more intentional with what I say yes to. Who will I be rolling deep with? Who do I already have very deep relationships with? What is a right-sized amount of commitments that I can take on? So I'm going to be showing up really deeply for the organizations that I've already committed to. But I can't show up to every single call to action, and that's just something that I need to be more mindful of. I also intend to increase the love and care that I give to myself and that I give to my household. And so that is going to look like fulfilling a lot of the wishes of my own inner child. Many people don't know this about me, but I am like such a horse person. I freaking love horses so much. And there is nothing that brings me more joy than going horseback riding. And it's something that I haven't done in decades. And so I've started taking horseback riding lessons. And that has just been something that I've decided to do for myself, just as something that brings me like pure joy. And I had a lot of, internal judgment about that, like what will people think of you, all these things. And I'm really trying to push back against the critical self that I hear in my head, and just say that I get to experience this. I am worthy. We all are worthy of joy, and that includes me. The last thing that, just transparently, I am exploring from a business sense is currently I intend to keep all of my content free, available to everyone at no cost. There's no paywall. Everything right now you can access without needing to pay for it. I do that because I really believe in the collective commons. I view this as a field building project, and it feels really aligned with my values and my desires to keep things the way they are. I don't believe that information and resources should be commoditized. And that said, I can't pretend that it doesn't require a significant amount of labor to produce, host, create the podcast, to write essays, to promote the work. And some of it is personal and vulnerable. Even the things that I'm sharing in this episode feel personal and vulnerable. So there are certain things that I'm considering, putting a paywall up, making available to paid subscribers only, both to really honor and make the labor that goes into these resources feel more reciprocal for the labor that I'm putting in, but also just to have a greater boundary between everything that I'm sharing about myself as a person and have more of a distance between, again, my identity and my work. And so, yeah, I'm just going to say this is like a really big tension area for me. It's bumping up against my values, my intentions, and what feels true, which is that sometimes it can feel really draining to share so much of myself out into the ether. And that's not a change that I'm planning to make, but it is something that I'm exploring within myself to try to understand, like, what is it that makes this feel draining sometimes? Is it the pace? Yes, but there's something deeper there as well. So that's a little bit about what I'm planning to do for 2026, both from a business perspective as well as a personal perspective. And I just want to name that with all of this in mind, there's a risk that I earn less through Reimagine Wealth than I did last year. There's also a risk that I disappoint people by scaling back all of the commitments that I've had. And these things really scare me, if I'm being honest. And I know that just because there's a risk of those things happening doesn't mean that they will happen, but it does mean that I'm slowing down. And that scares me because what if people stop tuning in? What if people don't want to listen to what I create anymore? Because there's been so much time. Like, there's all these stories in my head that I'm trying to challenge and that I know are not true, but still exist, still are there. So I'm trying to ground in the fact that the discomfort at the unknowing does not mean that I'm in danger. It does not mean that I will necessarily earn anything less than I did last year. It's possible that I actually earn more, but that it's also worth the other energetic commitments that I'm investing in. It's worth taking better care of myself. It's worth taking better care of my household and sharing more of the reproductive labor with my partner. I really do believe that it will lend itself to the work if I am more resourced myself. And I know that whatever life throws our way, we're resilient, we're adaptable, we'll pivot when we need to pivot. And so if you've made it this far, thank you for tuning in. Would love to hear what stood out to you or any intentions that you have for 2026. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.